guys, Mikey here, and welcome to the last episode of March Marvel Madness 2019 as presented by the Comic Junkies Corner. So, reboots, am I right? I don't know of many franchises that have had consistent do-overs than comic book movie franchises, and Marvel is no stranger to them. The main ones that come to mind are Spider-Man, Captain America, and Fantastic Four. But one that usually slips by people is the Punisher. It took 4 attempts to get the Punisher right, only for them to kind of screw it up again. But it's interesting that studios really wanted to try to make something out of this character. And it wouldn't be Bad Marvel Movie Month if we didn't go over the first 2 missteps. Oh, don't worry, we'll get to that. This is Old to the New. So the first Punisher film was directed by Mark Goldblatt, released in 1989. It stars Dolph Lundgren as the titular character, Gossett Jr., Jeroen Krabbé, and Kim Miyori. So this movie jumps right into the action. Frank Castle has been punishing for 5 years now, and has put a significant dent in the crime family's operation. He is wanted for 125 counts of murder, and that's only the ones the police know about. Frank is also being hunted by a task force led by his former friend and partner, Jake Barrowitz, played by Gossett Jr. I should note that while Jake believes that Frank is the Punisher, no one else really believes that Frank is even alive, due to being involved in an explosion that took the life of his family. This is despite scenes where he is sitting literally out in the open in broad daylight. I guess the cops aren't that interested in him after all.
Hey Johnny, don't that guy look like Frank?
Yeah, and he's dressed like that Punisher guy we've been chasing for 5 years.
Yeah, you're right, Johnny.
Yeah. Anyway, you catch the game last night?
Yeah, those darn Knicks cost me $50.
Anyway, because the mob is now weakened, a new threat is able to come to town. The Japanese Mafia, also known as the Yakuza. They see the chance to gain power in America and take it without mercy. Now this is actually the best part of the movie, this story element right here. Because Frank has been out killing people for 5 years, he inadvertently made room for a new and bigger threat. This would challenge the code he lives by. Maybe killing like this isn't the answer. Maybe he's been going about this wrong all this time. By thinking he's doing good, he was actually slowly making things worse. Well, this should be a new development that should really challenge our character. So how does Frank deal with this new mess that he himself has caused? By immediately killing more people, of course. Maybe he thinks if he kills them deader, they won't be a problem. Unfortunately, that's about as deep as the movie goes. This movie plays out a lot like a pre-Halo shooter game. There are some basic story elements that you can follow, but the goal was mainly to shoot and kill things, so it throws as many nameless and sometimes faceless baddies at you. Well, heck, at least they didn't poof away into green dust. But yeah, this movie is mainly about the action and violence, and everything else just comes secondary. So with that being said, this movie should have some good action, right? I mean, you have the mob, the Punisher, and friggin' ninjas in an all-out free-for-all. That being said, I can honestly say the action is good, except when it's really dumb. For every good action moment, there is one that is equally bat-poop insane and hilarious. There's moments where the Punisher is inexplicably teleporting from place to place, killing the bad guys. And there's the point where he survives not 1, but 2 massive explosions without even being scratched. Though I guess explosions aren't a big deal because this guy survives it and only dies from being stabbed in the back. I guess his health bar ran out? Now I know what you might be thinking if you haven't seen this movie. Dolph Lundgren? B-movie action star Dolph Lundgren as the Punisher? Well, believe it or not, he actually looks the part. He looks imposing as he towers over people, he's in great shape, and he can hold his own in the action sequences. His performance is pretty okay. You might notice he looks exhausted in a lot of these clips, and that's kind of him throughout the movie. Now there's times when it works and it makes sense for him to seem kind of strung out, but when the action is ramped up, you'd think he'd be a bit more alive and less sounding like he just woke up from a nap.
Hey man, you want a coffee? Hey man, don't even talk to me till I've had my morning coffee.
But the acting heavy in this movie is definitely Gossett Jr. He doesn't have much to work with, but he does bring it when the time calls for it. Especially when his character is finally able to confront Frank. He genuinely makes you believe that he is in pain and has been holding on to that pain for the past 5 years. All the other characters are just kind of There's nothing really to them outside of their character traits, and most of them are pretty much caricatures. The only characters of significance are Frank, because it's his movie, and Jake, because he has the emotional connection. Which brings me to another point. This movie plays out a lot like a sequel. It's as if it takes for granted that the audience knows who all of these people are and what their motivations would be, so it skips past the character development and just dives right into the story. I made the same point in my Spider-Man Homecoming review. As comic fans, we obviously know who the character is, but we don't know who this version of the character is. So you can't just skip it and say go read the comics, because that kind of defeats the purpose of watching the movie. In summary, it's an objectively bad film with good story elements. Like I said, the main star of the movie is the action and the inevitable kill count. But, oddly enough, the movie kind of knows what it is, and it isn't apologetic about it. It's targeting a crowd that just wants mindless action that teeters over into the ridiculous. It knows you're not going to pay that much attention to it, so it just says, F it. Which is fine, I suppose, but it's also kind of sad, because with the right amount of care, this movie could have been better than the Netflix series, or at least on par with season 1. But 15 years later, the studios would try again with their 2004 remake. Did they do any better? We'll find out in just a second. So the Punisher Remake, as I said, was released in 2004. It was directed by Jonathan Hensley. It stars Thomas Jane as the titular character, John Travolta, Will Patton, Roy Scheider, and Rebecca Romain Stamos. So unlike the original film, this film elects to go the route of the origin story. This is actually a smart choice because we get to learn more about Frank before he becomes the Punisher. We get to see what happened to him that causes him to go off the deep end. Now, we're no stranger to this. The perfect example is Harvey Dent in The Dark Knight. We experienced his descent, and because of it, we sympathized with him and were really able to understand him. So hey, if we could do that in a movie with Dent, who is not the main character, imagine what we could do in this movie with Frank, who is the main character. We'll keep imagining because we don't get that.
Got him!
Come on now, this is Bad Movies Month. You knew what this was. No, sadly, like most of the films I've talked about this month, it rushes through things. Frank is an undercover cop just a day away from retirement.
Woo! You know he did.
His last assignment is a sting operation that resulted in the death of the mob boss Howard Saint's son. Revenge is taken out on Frank as the mob murders his entire family, who are conveniently getting together for a reunion. And despite what the mob thinks, they fail to kill Frank. Frank eventually begins picking off Saint's men little by little, destroying his operation from the ground up, until it is time to take on the big fish himself. So yeah, basic revenge plot, nothing revolutionary, and the Punisher's backstory has always kind of been that way. But what's to be said about the execution of this story? Let's just say at one point this movie was supposed to be in the same universe as the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films. They even had Thomas Jane cameo in Spider-Man 2. Now you might be thinking, well, that sounds cool. They were trying to start an extended universe. But there's just one problem. Love them or hate them, you have to admit the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films are really silly. It was part of their charm to be campy and over the top. Try as you might, and trust me, this movie tried, the Punisher just doesn't fit that mold. It would be like trying to put The Dark Knight in the same universe as the 1978 Superman movie. It just wouldn't work. And that's probably the biggest problem with this movie. It's just silly. Almost everything is done in an over-the-top, on-the-nose thing. There's the retirement meme, there's the family reunion that's made to look like, oh, look at us, we are just having the best of days, I sure hope nothing bad happens to us. Most of the characters are caricatures, they really don't feel like real people. But the difference between this movie and the original is that the original kinda knows that. While the first one only tries to be a shoot-'em-up action movie, this one tries to be more story-driven and more serious. And that doesn't really mesh with the cartooniness of the situations and most of the characters. Did he just pull a fire hydrant out of his duffel bag? Where did he even get that? No, never mind. You see what I mean?
I'm not prepared to pursue my line of inquiry any further, as I think this is getting too silly.
There are some good things about the film, though. The big action set pieces are pretty good. The best one being when Castle's wife and son are trying to escape from the massacre. It's one of the few moments in the film where the tension is ramped up and the movie kinda gets really serious for a moment. It's well acted, and you genuinely feel bad when they don't make it. But I'd say most of the credit for anyone being invested in this movie has to go to Thomas Jane. Jane is actually a great choice to play the Punisher, and the man is really doing the best he can with what little he has to work with. He's got the physique, the look, the attitude. It's just a shame he wasn't able to do more with it. I mean, they didn't really let him punish a whole lot. Also, I would say that they could have made him look a bit more grisly. I mean, the dude has had many sleepless nights and is kind of an alcoholic. Rebecca Romain is pretty good as well. Again, has nothing to work with, but she's a natural. And in the short amount of screen time she has, actually has some good chemistry with Thomas. All in all, it's pretty bad. I mean, it has entertainment value. The action is decent, Thomas Jane is good, and the film does have some decent dramatic moments. But the silliness just kind of counteracts it.
I'm fine. He's not.
I mean, don't get me wrong, it is funny, but it's almost like no one asked the question, should this be funny? We are kind of delving into the psyche of a murderous vigilante, so should we not take this a bit more seriously? Sadly, this won't be the last movie outside of the MCU that has an overabundance of silliness. Oh. Sorry, I was expecting something to pop out there. So like I said, both of these films are bad, but as far as which one is worse, I have to say they're both equal. They both suffer in terms of character development, but they each have a standout performance or two. They both have some decent action scenes, both Punishers genuinely look the part, and they're both kinda silly. It's just that one of them is aware of it, and the other one doesn't seem like it. They're both of poor quality, but they're not as bad as some of the movies that I've reviewed this month. These are actually bearable. If you're looking for good Punisher content, obviously you're gonna flock to the Netflix series, but choosing between these two is just a matter of personal preference. If you want mindless, nonsensical shoot-'em-up action, then go with the '89 version. But if you want a movie that has a bit more story, then go with the one from 2004. Either way, you'll find something you like, or at least something to laugh at and make fun of. So anyway guys, that will conclude this year's March Marvel Madness. I hope you guys
Legs, pancreas, so many snacks, so little time.
I swear to Christ, if you eat me, I will f*** your insides.
Don't you mean f*** my insides up?
You heard me.
Is that any way to treat an old friend?
Oh, so what? You want a review too? Well, too bad. It's bad movie month is over, and I'm not shoehorning you in. What do I look like, Sony?
Well, perhaps we can make an arrangement.
What is this wee nonsense? Where are you?
I wanna take you for a ride.